and we've already supported the unanimous consent motion, but we'll be supporting the legislation to make this wage subsidy a reality. But I want to urge the government that while we're here in Ottawa, we should not leave here without knowing and without guaranteeing that all Canadians who need help get that help. La prestation canadienne d'urgence ne couvre tout simplement pas tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes qui ont besoin de cette aide. Trop nombreux sont ceux et celles qui risquent de tomber dans les cracks. Trop nombreux sont ceux et celles qui risquent de tomber dans les cracks. I think of some of the stories that I've heard over the past weeks about the people who desperately need help but are unable to access that help because they don't meet all the criteria. I think about people working multiple jobs to make ends meet who've lost most of their hours of work and don't know how they're going to pay for groceries. They should be applying for help. I think about the freelance and contract workers who have lost most of their income and are maxing out their credit cards to pay their bills. They should be applying for help. I think about students who depend upon summer jobs to pay the rent, some who work to support their families. Now they have no jobs to apply for. They should be applying for help. Artists, self-employed, people who are just on the margins. In fact, there's so many examples, and that's the problem. For the last several days, New Democrats have been working with the government to fix the gaps, and that work is reflected in the motion that we've heard and in the work that will be done. I want to thank the Prime Minister and other members of government for the constructive way they've worked with us. But we're not done yet. The current system discourages people who need help from applying because they still have some income or they don't meet all the criteria. Yesterday, the Minister confirmed that everyone who applies for the CERB will get it. So I asked the Prime Minister today, announce that all the criteria will be dropped and simply tell people, if you need help, apply for it and you'll get it. Let's keep it simple. Let's make sure that everyone who needs help knows that they can apply for that help and that they will receive it. The only way we're going to get through this crisis is if we take care of each other. We are all connected. And we won't stop fighting until every Canadian gets the help they need, period. There have been heroes in this crisis in fighting COVID-19, and I want to also acknowledge those frontline workers who are keeping us fed, those who are keeping us healthy. It's saddening that they don't have the equipment they need to protect themselves and prevent the risk of infecting their families. I specifically want to mention healthcare workers who are often sleeping in their cars or sleeping in tents to prevent the spread of infection or the risk of infection to their families. We have to do better. We have to ensure that all workers have the protective equipment that they need to stay safe. During this crisis, I also believe it's important to make very clear that there is no room for companies profiting off the desperation of people. Credit card companies and others charging double-digit interest rates need to be stopped. And we need to use all our powers at the federal level to make sure that happens. Banks are continuing to charge interest, leaving people worse off with the mortgage deferral. And in fact, they are profiting off of this crisis. The finance minister, I know, has spoken with the banks, but clearly speaking nicely hasn't worked. Banks are regulated expressly by the federal government. The Liberal government has to be prepared to use the powers we have to enforce pausing interest, putting a brake on that. And in fact, what we also need to do is to put a pause on mortgages so that we can work with provinces to put a pause on rent. This should also apply for commercial rent, which would significantly help out small and medium-sized businesses. I know that in the coming weeks we're going to start to talk about what a recovery would look like, how people will get back to work. And as we design this stimulus, I urge the Liberal government to not make the same mistakes of the past. Every public dollar that we spend must go to workers, not to CEOs. Executive bonuses and share buybacks, protecting shareholder profits, do not sustain or create jobs. Nous pouvons stimuler l'économie et faire les choses qui peuvent transformer notre nation et lutter contre la crise climatique. Construire des logements, investir dans le transport public, faciliter l'utilisation des énergies renouvelables par les Canadiens et Canadiennes, rendre nos maisons et nos bâtiments aussi efficaces que possible sur le plan énergétique, investir dans des services de garde d'enfants que toutes les familles peuvent se permettre et qui donnent à nos enfants l'éducation de haute qualité qu'ils se méritent. I also want to talk about Indigenous communities specifically. Over the last month, I've spoken with leaders across the country, Indigenous community leaders who've expressed very grave concerns around the lack of capacity for their communities to deal with a COVID-19 outbreak. These are communities as a result of historic and ongoing injustice that are without basic infrastructure, where washing one's hands with clean water is not often possible, where overcrowding and the lack of quality housing means physically distancing is also not a reality, where access to healthcare is severely limited to the point that the nearest ventilator for many communities is a flight away. I know the government has put some money on the table, but I've heard two specific concerns. One, that money is insufficient, and two, many Indigenous communities are finding it difficult to access that money. Historic neglect and racism has put Indigenous lives at greater risk of this virus. We have to do better, particularly the fact that in the coming weeks, many of these communities will face flooding, and this summer they'll face forest fires. So we need a clear plan for safe evacuation of these communities and a clear strategy to ensure that these communities have the resources they need to respond to COVID-19. Indigenous lives matter, and we need to make sure we're prepared. Mr. Speaker, I believe in the decisions. Mr. Speaker, I believe the decisions we make in the next weeks and months will be some of the most important of our lives. Some of the most important that any Canadian government has been faced with. Nous croyons en la solidarité. Nous croyons en l'entraide. We hear a lot of people talking about when will things return to normal. But I believe we need to do far better than normal. Normal is workers not having paid sick leave. Normal is families struggling on a minimum wage. Normal is people who are essential to our health and safety not getting paid enough to live. Normal is a public healthcare system that has been starved of funding. Normal is a society that is neither fair nor resilient. We can't ever go back to normal. Canadians are showing their compassion. They're showing their desire to care for one another. We should demand that of our government as well. We should demand that this Liberal government embrace those same values. Let's not return to the old normal. Let's build a new normal where we take better care of each other, where we have a strong social safety net that lifts us all up together. Let's build a Canada that is fair and resilient. Canadians are counting on us. They're counting us to learn from this crisis, to build a better Canada for all of us. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je veux commencer au début pour je veux reconnaître que nous sommes sur le territoire traditionnel des peuples algonquins. We are here on traditional, unceded Algonquin territory, and I thank them for hospitality and generosity. Miigwech. I also want to start by saying a large thank you. Merci à tous mes collègues pour l'occasion pour moi de prendre la parole sur cette journée tellement importante parce que c'est avec un accord unanime, consensus. Merci mille fois. It really means a lot to me that the Green Party is recognized in this place and allowed to speak as we gather in these entirely unprecedented times. I was moved by the Prime Minister's remarks in reminding us of Vimy. I hadn't planned to speak about Vimy, but April 9th this year, and I noticed my husband very depressed, he's sort of wandering about, and I said, what is I'm thinking of my grandfather, who was machine gunned on Vimy, April 9th, 1917. His grandfather survived, otherwise I wouldn't be married to my husband, I suppose. But his grandfather, John Owen Wilson, survived, got back to British Columbia, and ended up as Chief Justice of the British Columbia Supreme Court. But